Hello everyone. The reason why I'm doing this video is I have listened to a number of Aldrich members, and all of them say pretty much, well, most of them say pretty much the same thing, that they have a hard time working with Generalized Hyperbolic Stretch. Now, I'm such a big fan of GHS and PixInsight. I've been using it for well over a year, since it first came out. And Mike Cranfield, who wrote it, has done a great job, I think, in terms of improving it since its first iteration. So I've come quite comfortable with it, and I want to basically cover some of the key features and the simplest way I can explain it, so that maybe I can convert some of you into being GHS users, now that I think the product has come to a point where it's mature. So in any case, let's get started. I have three images over here that we're going to process, that we're going to stretch. The first one is a color image of the Flaming Star Nebula, and it's the nebula only. I've used Star Exterminator to extract the stars from the nebula, so I have the stars only, the nebula only, and then I also have a narrowband image of monochrome. We're going to try to stretch all of these in a fair amount of time, and I'm going to take you through the whole process. Alright, so first of all, let's cover what we're seeing on the screen. I know it looks complicated, but believe it or not, it's not really that complicated, and see if I can prove it to you. Now, probably the most important thing you need to understand is the histogram and what you're looking at. I'm not going to explain how a histogram works. We have a video on the Aldrich website that covers that, but it's important for you to understand we're going to be looking at this histogram quite a bit, so that we can see exactly what we're doing to our target, in addition to seeing it in the preview window. It will better explain how these controls work down below here. So let's first cover various areas of this screen. I'm not going to cover these tools. These are just various ways of showing the histogram. I'm not covering that today. I will say that when we do want to zoom in on a section of the histogram, such as a linear picture that's not been stretched, where all the data you can see is pegged to the left here, you can zoom in on that by using these controls up here. I generally start out by using just the number toggle here, and you can see how it zooms this in and out. You can use the plus and minus sign magnifiers, but it does it at a much larger extent. So if I click on that, you can see it's 250, which is a lot more than what we need. So I'm going to reset it using this one, and then I'm just going to move the histogram up so that we can see what data that we have pegged to the left, because it's basically the histogram goes from black to white, and this black side is kind of where everything is right now, as you can see looking at our picture. So what else do we want to cover? These three sections, well, four sections down below here. We have the readout data, and really the only things that you're going to see in here is the value when you pick a value on the histogram for setting the symmetry point, and you can send that value with this button here down to the symmetry point. We're going to get into that a little bit more. In the color options section is where you can set what data in your image you want to stretch. So you have the ability of stretching all three channels RGB at the same time. You can stretch the red only, the green only, the blue only. You can stretch just luminance. You can stretch just the saturation values, or you can target just the color. Okay, and quite honestly, I have used primarily RGB. Very rare do I use lightness here, but sometimes I do. I usually address this when I combine my lightness, my luminance with my color data. But you can do it here. You can address saturation here. I most often use the saturation tool. And last but not least, color, and I'll explain when I use color occasionally. So at the bottom is really where the main controls are. You have 5 different transformation types, so that these are different algorithms in terms of how your curves are applied and are working on your image. Obviously, by default, Generalized Hyperbolic is the one that's here, and it's the one I use the most. But I often use ArcSine for stretching color images. What that will generally do is stretch color images so that the highlights are not blown out. I especially use this for stretching stars, star-only images, if I don't want my stars to get blown out. And last but not least, linear, and you'll see when we use the linear to really adjust the black point. All right? So let's walk us through it. Oh, last but not least, the bottom here. And I'll talk about the adjust parameter here later. But the bottom here is where you can turn on your preview, which I just did. So we can see what we're doing to our image. You can apply your image either by pressing this button or dragging this onto your image. So those are the options that you have. So the first thing I want to do is set my symmetry point for my first stretch. And if you understand how stretches work with the symmetry points, basically everything to the right of the symmetry point is primarily what you're stretching. It is stretching some to the left, but primarily it's stretching what's to the right. So for your first stretch, you generally want to go, since all your data is in this area, you definitely want to go somewhere on the left side of the peak here as your first stretch. Now you can set your symmetry point by clicking here, and then you can see how there's a value here, and then clicking on the send to SP, which will send the symmetry point value into here. Or you can drag this little kernel here over, and that will also set it. So those are 2 ways of doing it. I generally just use the button. You can see how the value is now in here. So now my symmetry point is set. I'm going to reset my histogram so I can see the whole thing. And I'm going to do my initial stretch. Now for my first stretch, I generally set my local intensity up to somewhere between 10 and 12. And I'm going to show you what happens when you move it. In fact, I'm going to reset this. I'm going to just leave it here first. And I'll just start stretching. And I'm going to stretch until we get where we can start seeing something in the histogram. And you see what happens to the curve. Now, this here is the reference point for where your data is without any adjustments to it at all. So basically your numbers are starting out from 0, go all the way to 1, and these are all the decimal values in between. So this red curve here is what we're actually doing in terms of increasing the values by showing you a curve. And you can see basically except everything to the right of the line, the vertical line here, is pegged right to the very top because the red line is at the very top here. And that's why I don't like to use a local intensity of 0. I generally, for my first stretch, and you can see what's happening up here to this curve, for my first stretch I like to use a local intensity somewhere between 10 and 12. Okay? And then what I like to do for my first stretch, because we're going to do a lot of them, is I like to just initially start with a stretch that takes me to that first quarter point here on the graph. Okay, so we have a nice stretch. Nothing is being blown out. We're focusing on the bottom end of the graph. That's where a lot of the stretch is being done. That's where the biggest difference is between this line and this line, right? So that's what we want to focus on because that's where our data is right now. So I'm going to apply this. The thing that you'll see when you apply a stretch is the data is actually applied in my image, but for the preview, what Generalized Hyperbolic Stretch does is it reapplies the exact same settings to the preview again. And we don't want that. You can see this is where our graph was, and this is where it is now, all in the white, and that's why you're seeing white here. So we got to reset it. So now, one of the things that I see looking here is already, I can see the background is brightening up. It's up around 0.25, and I like it to be around 0.1. So what I'm going to do, and that's shown here in our histogram, we have this large bench where we have our data all in this area right here, with a large bench to the left of it, which is in the black side of things. So we're going to get this to slide to the left. And the way we do that is we use linear. The only setting that I primarily use here is the black point setting. You drag it to the right and you watch what's going on up here. And you basically want to leave a bench that's probably close to the width of what your data is right here. So I generally go over here and look to see what the setting is, where it's taken from 0.25 to 0.07. That's a little too low, it's a little too dark. I like to shoot for a 0.1. So I'm going to back it off a little bit, see where we are now. That's getting very close. You can use your mouse wheel too. And that's close. Right there is good enough. So that's what I'm going to shoot for. I'm going to apply that. Reset once again. So now we need to do another stretch. And what I want to try to target as much as possible is some of the, well, let's zoom in here. I'm going to zoom in on my preview. We're going to zoom in on this section of this nebula. And I'm going to zoom in on some of the dimmer parts of the nebula. So I'm going to set my symmetry point. And you can see now we're on the right side of the peak of the histogram. Once again, still most of our data is dark. So a lot of these values that you're seeing here are still dark values. We want to now start brightening the other side a little bit, the actual nebula data. So I'm going to set my symmetry point to that side. You can see the caret set now. I'm going to leave the local intensity now at 0 this time. We're going to adjust this to taste, but now we're going to start working on our stretch factor. I'm going to go back and show the whole nebula here, and let's see what happens when I start stretching this. You can see the nebula is starting to show nicely. We always want to watch out that the brightest areas are not going to get blown out. We want to keep that probably well below 0.9, probably more along 0.85. We're still, the brightest points here are right around 0.85, so we don't want to go any brighter than that. You can see how the curve is. Maybe I want to back this off a little bit and actually make my slope a little bit higher right in the area of where my symmetry point is. So what that does is it won't raise these highlights as much, because right now the slope is really almost straight up in the area of my symmetry point, which is right there. My slope is almost straight up, and then it curves off, when it gets to the brighter areas of the image, which is fine. So now, since I have my local intensity up a little bit, I'm going to raise it a little bit more, maybe right around there. And then we'll put the stretch factor up a little bit. Not too much though. We'll see what these values still look like. 0.69, yeah, right around 0.69 into the brightest sections. So that's pretty good. I'm going to apply this. Once again, we have to reset. So what do we want to do? I mean, one of the things I definitely want to do is I want to reset the black point. So I'm going to go back to linear, and I am going to raise the black point a little bit. Once again, so that the bench looks more reasonable, probably in that area there. Let's see what it looks like. Yeah, we're getting pretty close. Yeah, that's close enough. That looks starting to look pretty good. I'm going to apply that. Reset. So from here, you can start doing some minor stretches. Like, for example, one of the things we may want to do is we may want to add a little contrast to these dimmer nebulosity areas. So once again, we can use our preview zoom. We can zoom into this, and maybe what we want to do is pick an area that we want to brighten a little bit, like maybe right here. You can see where that symmetry point is, more to the right side of the peak, but we still have a lot of data out here. We're starting to stretch, so we're seeing more and more data go to the brighter grays and stuff like that. So I'm going to send this to the symmetry point down here. Once again, I'm going to leave my local intensity at 0. I'm going to reset my preview so I can see the whole nebulosity, and now we're going to start raising our stretch factor, and you can see we're starting to see some stuff here. So I want to do a couple of things. You can see how bright this is getting in here now. We're over 0.83 and some of the brightest 0.84. So now is where I can show you how you use the highlight protect. Now I want you to look at this area here, of the histogram curve. Specifically this red line here, which is what we're doing, what we're going to apply to our image if we apply it. So I want you to see how this area is going to go down when I lower this. Okay, so I'm going to lower this, and you can see how that curve is now going down, and it's now protecting some of the brightest areas of the image. Now, since I really want to target the area that I want to target, I can now start raising the slope of the local intensity in the area. Remember, this is our caret here. We're going to start raising the slope of the contrast in this area. So I'm going to start raising that, and you can see what it's doing to our image. I may start raising the stretch factor a little bit. Once again, this is starting to get bright. It's staying within reason, I guess, so we can kind of leave it alone. One thing I do want to do is start playing with the symmetry point. And we'll see what that does to the data if I just move it back and forth a little bit. So I like what it did to the black point here. I don't like seeing this bump here so much, and that's something we can address. But what we're basically seeing is the brightness here. And so one thing I can do once again is I can lower the lower the highlight protect. You can see how I'm flattening that out a little bit so that we're not getting anything out of control. I can also, you can see how my curve on the left side of my symmetry point is below. I may want to protect some of this dim nebulosity, and you can do that with the protect shadows. So if I increase this, you can see what it's doing to the line here. It's actually raising it up a bit. So now we're kind of getting the best of both worlds. We're actually increasing the intensity of the area that I wanted to increase, and we're also protecting the highlight areas, and we're also protecting the dimmer sections. We don't want to completely blow that out. Maybe I went up a little bit too high on that, but that's probably good there. All right, let's see how this looks. I could actually ease up a little bit on the protect highlights, bring it up a little bit. So anyways, that gives you an idea. Now down here is where you can see how the numbers move very fast when I are moving this left and right. This down here, especially if this value is checked, I would initially uncheck this for the highest sensitivity. This is where you can make adjustments that are much finer. They're basically, whatever the last thing is you clicked will automatically set this drop down. You can see you can adjust the stretch factor, the local intensity, the symmetry point, the protect shadows, and the protect highlights. So what's nice is this allows you to, much finer control. You may find that you don't really need to go as high as that, as this thing does when you're moving things, right? Or this particular one does. So in this case, let's say or actually in this one, let's say I want to really flatten out this area here of the curve, even though it doesn't look so bad here. Let's say I want to lower this. Maybe I only, I get to a certain point, and then maybe I want to really use this to, fine tune it, in terms of where I want it, want the curve to go, and that's what the purpose of this fine adjustment is. It's basically what it says it is. All right, I'm going to apply this, and last but not least, we may want to do one more slight adjustment of black point. Slide this over a little bit to get that little bit of contrast back, and let's say that I'm done. All right, so this is one possible stretch. You can normally I would do many stretches here. I obviously don't have time to spend all night on this, but what's also nice, and I'll show you here, let's say we wanted to adjust contrast for certain areas of the image. You have the ability of adjusting contrast not only with sharpening, but you can actually do some of it with generalized hyperbolic stretch. So let's say you wanted to bring out some of these features here, like in this area. So let's say I wanted to add some contrast to features like this in the image. I can click on an area right near the brightest point. I usually go just to the right, or left of a peak of a brightness area. That will set the symmetry point. And let's back this back off to see the whole thing. And now, so I'm going to target some of the contrast in these areas here. It's anything that's similar similar to these brightness levels are going to get adjusted also. But so I'm going to make sure my symmetry point is sent down here. Always check that. And now I'm going to actually, you know what I do? I'm going to actually zoom back in here so we can see it while we're doing it. I'm going to use maybe I think I'm going to use a local intensity of just a little bit, maybe like 1 or something like that. And I'm going to show you what happens when we work on the slider here. So you can see that I'm brightening this area, and I can also protect, once again, let's show you before and after. So this is before and after. I can also protect, like I said, I can adjust this slope so that we're focusing more in one area. Like, so for example, I can go a little crazy with the local intensity, so the slope is going to be really high in that area, but really bring down my, my protect highlights so that I'm only focusing a lift in a certain area. And now is where we can actually adjust my symmetry point, so you can see, in fact I'm going to do it with this, you can see what area I'm touching. I mean, I can move to the right or left. I can actually even use the caret here. You can see what it's going to do. This way basically brightens the dimmer parts. If I go this way, it dims that part and brightens the other side. Once again, I can also say I want to protect some of the dim spots, so I can protect my shadows. So once again, I'm trying to just target, these features here. So I can bring, the protect shadows up close to where the symmetry point is. So you have a lot of control. I mean, we're looking at our curve. This is where our symmetry point is right now. Or is it this? Yeah, it's this. This is where our symmetry point is right now, so you can see what's being adjusted. And I may actually want to, increase the high, the stretch factor a little bit here, and maybe adjust the symmetry point a little bit more, right or left here. So I'm getting the stuff that I want bright, and not brightening anything else. Protect the shadows. So, we're really doing a really targeted contrast enhance. So let's go back to the whole picture. And you can see, I brought out some of this, brought out a little bit more here. Obviously you can really target this when you're, using your sharpening. But I wouldn't generally necessarily have to do this. Obviously you want to target a lot of these features using local histogram equalization or MLT, sharpening tool. But I just wanted to show you how you can very precisely target areas of your target without blowing other areas out. All right, enough of this. I'm going to reset this tool, shut off preview. We're going to try working with a different picture now. All right, so now we're going to do a stars only. So generally what I do is I do my stars separate from my nebula. Because the nebula gets sharpened much different than the stars. Generally, the stars get sharpened much less than the nebula does. Not sharpened, I'm sorry. The stars get stretched much less than the nebula does. And this is really a great way to control how many stars you actually see in your nebula if you stretch them separate from your nebula, because now you don't have to like minimize, you use any of the minimize star features, where your stars may be blowing your nebula out. This is a really nice way of controlling just how much contribution your stars have in in your overall picture when you combine them back. Now, the reason why I wanted to show you a stars only picture is I generally stretch stars using a different technique. And then in this case, I will use, instead of generalized hyperbolic stretch, I like to use arcsine stretch. And the reason for that is it generally brightens the stars, but really retains the color really nice. Even when you start seeing these really brighter stars, these stars that we're seeing now, since it's a linear image, are generally fairly bright. There's a lot of other stars in here. So we don't want to blow any of these stars, the color on any of these stars out, and I find arcsine stretch does a great job at that. For my initial stretch for stars, I generally just keep the symmetry point at 0. So in other words, I want to stretch everything from the darkest areas all the way up, because in a stars only image, that's all you have is stars. There is no background, because the background is in your nebula picture, right? So I am going to use arcsine stretch, and I am just going to basically, actually I do set a separate symmetry point. No, not symmetry point, I'm sorry. We're just going to use our stretch factor here. And you can see we're starting to bring our stars in. And it's bringing them in nicely, and it's also preserving, the colors in here. Now, what I like to do, my first stretch, I just like to bring it to the point where I don't want them too big. I don't want them overwhelming my nebula. So I generally bring them in something, where, something like this, where the stars look good, but the nebula is not going to get overwhelmed. The stars still have color. Everything kind of looks good. Now, the alternative that you can do, if you find that your stars don't have enough color, is instead of using RGB, you can try using color. And you see what it just did? This is the difference between color and RGB on the stretching algorithms. Okay. Now, let's say I use color here for my arcsine stretch, and maybe the stars are too colorful. This is where you can back off on the blend here a little bit and get them exactly where you want them. Okay, maybe you can see the difference between here and here. This definitely basically knocks them down, nicely. So this would be a good star image in my opinion. So I would just basically apply that, hit reset, and this would be what I would go with for my stars image, basically. Alright, enough of that. I'm going to reset my GHS, get rid of my stars picture. Alright, and last but not least, I'm going to show you a narrowband. So if you're ever doing any narrowband work where you have, just monochrome data, this is what you're going to see. The way you do narrowband or monochrome data is very, very similar to the way you do color-only data. Once again, I like to start out hitting the preview. Start out by finding my peak in the histogram, because I like to set the symmetry point to the left side of the peak. I'm going to send that down to my symmetry point down here. I reset my histogram stretch so I can see the whole thing. And once again, for local intensity, I generally like to go up in the realm of between 10 and 12. And now I'll actually do my stretch. And once again, for my first stretch, I like to bring the peak somewhere to the point of that first quarter of the histogram. You can see my nebula is starting to show here now. I'm going to apply this, reset it. Alright, I guess you might guess, since we have this large bench down here on the histogram in terms of the black point, we're going to lower the black point. So I'm going to go down the linear, and we're going to basically set that black point back a little bit so we start getting some contrast in our picture. I think I went a little too far here. That's pretty close. Maybe a little bit more. Yeah, right about there. That's a good first stretch. Apply it. Reset. Alright, now this works the exact same way. You know, all the other ones that I've done, I typically, for my next stretches, I like to look for like a dimmer section of the histogram, I should say, of the nebula. So I'm going to zoom in up here. I am going to pick something like this. You can see where that is on the histogram. I'll reset my preview here. Send my symmetry point down. I'm going to leave the local intensity alone initially. And I am going to start raising this, and you can see it's starting to bring out some nice features in here. Once again, you want to look on your brightest areas. You can use your preview tool and check the brightest areas. So this might be one here. You can see it's 0.79. So that's, you know, getting to a point where I don't really want to go any more than that. Reset this. So now I can start playing around with my local intensity a little bit in terms of what kind of looks good to me. If I raise this, it really starts brightening this middle section, maybe too much. That's actually starting to look pretty good there. So what I would probably do is well, I think I may raise this up a little bit and then bring down the high end a little. So what I'm trying to do here is find that balance between getting some of this dim stuff out here and, you know, some of the inner stuff here. I'm going to try adjusting my symmetry point a little bit, left and right. See what it does to the picture. Get it to where you want it. I think that doesn't look too bad. Alright, so that's probably good enough. I don't think I need to adjust the shadow point looks fine. Alright, so I'm going to apply this, reset the tool. Now, if you wanted to add some more contrast in here, we could, like into the center section, you could do it now or wait to do it in your sharpening mode. This does seem a little washed out in here to me. So, you know, I think I definitely want to address that. Maybe the first thing we do is we play a little bit with the, bring the black point up a little bit. Apply that. And then we're going to go back into the center section here. And maybe we target an area way off to the end here so that we maybe bring up some of the contrast of these features if you want to do that. So I am going to send this to the symmetry point, play with the stretch factor once again, see how that really brings that up. Play with the symmetry point where maybe we want to brighten that a little bit more. Play with the local intensity. But you see what I'm doing here. This really has added just incredible amount of features. Maybe too much so. You know, it's to everybody's taste, of course. But you know, I can see that I have to. My protect shadows needs to come up. You know, I need to get some of that detail back. But you know, you see the point. You have really a lot of control over your contrast in your images. playing around and having an understanding of, you know, what you're doing, what this curve looks like in an area that you're targeting. You know, because anytime you do an S curve like this, you're increasing contrast, and you can control exactly where that contrast is basically being put. So, anyways, that pretty much covers how to use generalized hyperbolic stretch. I think I kind of covered the key features in terms of you know, what all these values are. I mean, it's not super complex. A stretch factor is just how much do you want to stretch. Local intensity is how steep do you want this curve to be in the area that you're applying your symmetry point. A symmetry point is just what brightness level in here, you know, what area in your image do you want to target. That's all a symmetry point is, okay? Protect shadows is what it sounds like. It will raise or lower the left side of this curve, you know, on the left side of your symmetry point. So if you find that your background areas or the dimmer part of your nebulas or your galaxy is getting too dim, then you would increase to protect shadows. Now, one thing that you should keep in mind, and I didn't mention this, you cannot, once your symmetry point is set, you can't go beyond the symmetry point on the protect shadows on this side, and you can't go lower than the symmetry point with, you know, with the highlight protection on this side. That basically is the gating factor for, you know, basically how far you can move these two bottom sliders, okay? Which kind of makes sense because, remember, this is the guy that controls which side of the slider you're actually working on, and these are the guys that control how high or low you know, your adjustments are on each side of the symmetry point. So that's pretty much covers it. Hopefully I didn't confuse anybody. I hope I made things a little clearer in terms of how you can kind of control everything. Remember, it's all about this red curve. This red curve tells you exactly what adjustments are going to be done to a picture. All right. Anyways, that's it. I tried to do this in under 40 minutes. I think I managed. I didn't want to take too long. I have other GHS videos on the club's website. I thought this one here would be more targeted to just focusing in on how you're working these controls and understanding what's going on in the histogram itself. Anyways, that's it. Thank you very much.